Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, who am I really? Not the face you wear for your friends, not the version of you your family expects, and not even the role you play at work or in society, but the self that lurks just beneath. The surface, the one you hardly dare to meet, the part of you that you silence in polite conversation, the thoughts you quickly dismiss because they're inconvenient, unacceptable, or simply too much. What if I told you that the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge aren't gone? They didn't disappear into nothingness. They wait for you, patiently, in the dark corridors of your unconscious mind. And whether you realize it or not, they shape your decisions, your relationships, your moods, and your entire reality. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological thinkers of the 20th century, called this hidden force the shadow. And it's far more present in your life than you might dare to believe. Imagine this. There's a woman named Elise. Elise is kind, generous, always available when someone needs a shoulder to cry on. She remembers birthdays, sends flowers, and answers texts. At midnight when a friend is spiraling, she's the one you call when life gets heavy, because Elise always makes room for your burdens. But what no one seems to notice is that Elise is exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. She gives so much of herself that there's nothing left when she's alone. She stares at the ceiling at night, her phone silent, realizing she's surrounded by people yet completely invisible. And in her quiet moments, a strange bitterness creeps in, a resentment she can't voice because it would betray the very identity she's built. The good friend, the selfless daughter, the understanding partner. Elise doesn't know it, but every time she swallows her frustration, every time she denies her own needs, those unexpressed emotions don't simply vanish. They sink into the depths of her unconscious mind, feeding what Jung called the shadow self. And here's the terrifying part. What we refuse to confront within ourselves ends up controlling us from the dark. Have you ever felt like Elise? Have you ever caught yourself saying yes when your heart screamed no? Have you ever smiled through anger, held back your tears because you didn't want to be too sensitive, or stayed silent because you feared being judged? Those moments might seem harmless, even necessary, in the social dance of daily life, but over time, those denied parts of you accumulate like sediment at the bottom of a well, and eventually, they find ways to seep into your reality. Sometimes, through sudden bursts of rage you can't explain. Sometimes through an unshakable feeling of emptiness. And sometimes by sabotaging your relationships, your peace, and your sense of self. All without your conscious awareness. This is the nature of the shadow. It's the collection of everything within you that you've rejected. Every dark impulse, shameful memory, unspoken desire, and hidden fear. Not because you're evil or broken, but because society, family, and culture taught you that certain parts of yourself were unacceptable, unlovable, dangerous, and so you buried them. But as Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In today's video, we're going to step into those shadowed corners of the psyche. We'll unravel Carl Jung's theory of the shadow, what it is, how it forms, and more importantly, how it quietly shapes your reality while you remain oblivious to its presence. We'll explore how the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't just disappear. They become puppeteers in your life, pulling invisible strings that determine your choices, your attractions, your fears, and the roles you play in the world. But this won't be a mere psychological theory session. This will be a mirror, because the truth is, the shadow isn't some abstract concept reserved for philosophy books or therapy rooms. It's alive in your daily life, in your resentments, in your sudden moods, in the patterns of self-sabotage you keep falling into, and in the unsettling feeling that something about your life isn't fully yours. And by the end of this journey, you might realize that the key to reclaiming your life isn't found in chasing more positivity, more productivity, or more approval. It's found in facing what you've tried so hard to avoid. The rejected parts of you hold the power you've been searching for. So I invite you to walk with me into the shadows. Not to get lost in the darkness, but to reclaim what's been hiding there all along, because your shadow shapes your reality, and it's time you met it. When Carl Jung first introduced the idea of the shadow, it wasn't merely a theory. It was a revelation, a map of the unseen forces that shape human experience from behind the veil of consciousness. While Freud had opened the door to the unconscious, Jung stepped further into its depths, illuminating the terrain where forgotten memories, forbidden desires, and rejected parts of the self gathered like shadows in a dimly lit room. To understand the shadow, we must first understand what Jung believed about the human psyche. At its core, Jung proposed that our consciousness, the identity we wear in public, is but a thin slice of who we truly are. Beneath the surface lies the personal unconscious, a realm containing memories, emotions, and experiences we've forgotten or repressed. But deeper still exists the collective unconscious, a vast inherited reservoir of archetypes and instincts, shared by all human beings. And within this layered structure, somewhere between the personal and collective, is the shadow self. The shadow is composed of everything you deny in yourself, everything society has told you is wrong, shameful, or dangerous to express. Rage, lust, envy, weakness, vulnerability, pride. It's a living archive of the parts you hide, either because you fear them or because you believe you must. But Jung warned that what you repress does not disappear. It lingers, it waits, and it finds other ways to emerge. The core theory: what is the shadow and why does it matter? The shadow is not evil by nature. It's not the villain lurking inside you. It's simply the parts of your psyche you've exiled because they conflicted with your conscious image of yourself. And here lies the paradox. The more you deny these aspects, the stronger they become. Jung argued that the shadow operates autonomously, influencing your behavior, emotions, and perceptions. Without your awareness, it colors your relationships, the roles you assume, and the situations you unconsciously seek out. He wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. In other words, your shadow is a psychic force that grows in proportion to your resistance against it, and this is where psychic energy comes into play." Jung believed that the psyche operates on a kind of energetic system. Every thought, emotion, and repressed impulse carries psychic energy. When you deny or suppress parts of yourself, you don't eliminate that energy. You merely relocate it into the unconscious. But repressed energy is unstable. It festers, creating psychological tension that must eventually find expression, often in ways you neither expect nor desire. This can manifest as sudden outbursts of anger, anxiety, depression, addiction, self-sabotage, or the eerie sense that life is happening to you rather than through you. The shadow isn't just a collection of negative traits. It can also contain positive qualities you've denied: assertiveness, ambition, sensuality, creativity. Because at some point, you were conditioned to believe they were dangerous or unacceptable. And here's the chilling truth. The shadow shapes your reality whether you acknowledge it or not. Key concepts: how the shadow operates in daily life. Let's translate this theory into something tangible. Scenario 1, the passive martyr. Consider Michael, the reliable colleague, the one who picks up extra shifts, covers for mistakes, and never voices a complaint. On the surface, he's the model employee. But beneath that polished exterior lies a storm of resentment and anger. Michael's shadow holds the rage he's never allowed himself to express. the countless moments he felt exploited, overlooked, or dismissed. He tells himself that being agreeable keeps the peace, but his repressed anger leaks out in passive-aggressive remarks, sarcastic humor, or secret fantasies of quitting dramatically. This is the shadow at work. Scenario 2, the judgmental friend. Then there's Ava, the friend who constantly criticizes others' life choices. She mocks people for being too emotional, too impulsive, too self-centered. What she doesn't realize is that she's projecting. The traits she condemns in others are often the ones she denies in herself. In psychology, this is called projection, a primary mechanism of the shadow. When parts of yourself feel too threatening to acknowledge, you attribute them to others. It's safer to see arrogance, greed, or weakness in your neighbor than to confront it within. Jung called this the mirror of the soul. Those who trigger strong emotional reactions in you often reflect aspects of your shadow. Scenario 3, the emotionally exhausted caregiver. And let's return to Elise. Her compulsive need to be emotionally available isn't purely altruistic. It's partly driven by a fear of abandonment, a belief that her worth is tied to how useful she is to others. Her shadow contains unacknowledged rage at being taken for granted and a hunger for reciprocity she dares not express. If Elise never confronts this shadow, it will eventually erupt, either by destroying relationships through psychosomatic illness or by leading her into situations where she unconsciously reenacts her neglect, confirming her belief that she is invisible. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of life wasn't happiness or success, but individuation. This is the process of integrating the unconscious into consciousness, becoming whole by acknowledging and embracing every part of yourself, even those that terrify you. He argued that most people remain trapped in a state of partial consciousness, mistaking their public persona for their true self. But this persona is merely a mask, crafted to meet the expectations of society, family, and culture. The shadow is the other half of this mask. True freedom, Jung claimed, lies not in denial but in confrontation. When you face your shadow, when you name your rage, your envy, your desires, your sorrow, you reclaim the psychic energy bound within it. You liberate yourself from compulsive patterns and unconscious projections. This is why Jung viewed the shadow not as an enemy, but as a guide. He wrote, "The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared. Who goes down to the deep well." Facing your shadow means wrestling with your own darkness. But it also means reclaiming lost vitality, creativity, and authenticity. Another of Jung's key insights was that psychic energy, the life force that animates your mind, is finite. Like currency, you only have so much to spend. When you overextend yourself emotionally, when you pour your energy into maintaining appearances, pleasing others, or suppressing emotions, you deplete this vital force. Jung observed that chronic emotional depletion leads to what he called psychic exhaustion. It's a state where you feel disconnected from yourself, unmotivated, and inexplicably heavy, as though the world has lost its color. This depletion often occurs when people ignore their shadow. By denying parts of yourself, anger, lust, sorrow, ambition, you divert psychic energy into maintaining repression. And this isn't sustainable. Over time, the unconscious demands release, either through breakdown or breakthrough. The breakthrough is what Jung called shadow integration. It involves consciously acknowledging your hidden traits and understanding their origins. It's not about acting out every impulse, but about owning them, recognizing that your anger signals violated boundaries, that your envy reveals unfulfilled desires, that your sadness mourns what you've abandoned in yourself. This act of integration restores psychic energy. It allows you to live from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, And so, we arrive at a deeper truth. The shadow is not your enemy. It's the part of you that holds the keys to your authenticity. To face it is to reclaim your life from the forces of unconscious conditioning. But make no mistake, it demands courage. Because to meet your shadow is to see yourself stripped of pretense, beyond social approval, beyond inherited beliefs. It's to ask, in the deepest silence of your soul, who am I when no one is watching? And the answer to that question will either terrify you or set you free. Have you ever wondered why the people who give the most, love the hardest, and listen endlessly often feel like they're standing in a room full of people who can't seem to see them? They pour themselves into the lives of others, becoming the ever-dependable friend, partner, or parent. Yet, when the lights go out and the crowds disperse, they realize that no one truly knows them. Their face becomes a mask worn for the comfort of others, while their real self retreats into shadow. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow, a hidden, unconscious part of the psyche, composed of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Not just our so-called flaws, but our unmet needs, unspoken frustrations, and buried desires. And as long as we refuse to confront it, the shadow quietly governs our lives from the darkness. But here's the unsettling truth. It is precisely in our attempts to be endlessly available and emotionally giving to others that we exile parts of ourselves. In modern society, where self-worth is often measured by how useful, agreeable, and self-sacrificing one can be, people are silently dismantling their own identity in service of a dangerous ideal, and it's killing them from the inside. We've been conditioned to believe that love is earned through sacrifice. The more you give, the more you're needed. The more you're needed, the more you're loved. It's a comforting illusion, but one that fractures the soul. Jung warned of this psychic depletion. When a person over-identifies with the persona, the social mask presented to the world, they repress the aspects of their psyche that don't align with it. If your persona is the caregiver or the helper, the parts of you that crave solitude, recognition, or selfish pleasure are pushed into the shadow. And here's the counterintuitive insight. The more you make yourself available, the less people truly see you. Your identity becomes flattened to a role, a utility, rather than a multidimensional human being. Jung called this ego alienation, where the self is abandoned in favor of societal approval. A study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who suppress their authentic emotions in social situations experience higher rates of emotional exhaustion, depressive symptoms, and interpersonal disconnection. They become emotionally depleted because their psychic energy is spent maintaining a false self rather than nurturing their authentic being. What if your constant giving doesn't make you more loved, but more invisible? Now here's where it turns darker. The parts of ourselves we exile to the shadow do not die. They ferment. They manifest in unexpected ways, in sudden outbursts, irrational anxiety, passive-aggressive behavior, or quiet resentment. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Consider the overworked nurse who, after years of putting everyone else first, finds herself snapping at a patient for a minor request, or the loyal friend who harbors silent envy and bitterness. These moments aren't moral failings. They are eruptions of the ignored self, the shadow demanding recognition. In one striking example, a 2016 study published in Psychological Science showed that individuals who chronically suppress undesirable thoughts and emotions displayed higher levels of anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems. The repression of psychic energy takes a toll not just on mental health but on the body itself. The shadow doesn't vanish, it waits. and society, ever addicted to appearances, teaches us to keep it that way. Modern culture encourages constant productivity, digital personas, and curated lives. Jung would have seen this as the mass production of personas, leaving entire populations dissociated from their authentic selves. The proliferation of social media has intensified this phenomenon. People showcase carefully edited aspects of their lives, repressing their failures, insecurities, and darker emotions. Yet behind closed doors, rates of anxiety, loneliness, and depression soar. Could it be that in our attempt to be liked by everyone, we've become invisible to ourselves? The tension here lies in realizing that this isn't accidental. Societal norms quietly incentivize this erasure. Emotional availability is praised, self-sacrifice is noble. Being the strong one earns respect, but at a devastating cost. And here's the crux. Those repressed, unseen parts of you don't just affect your mental state, they subtly shape your decisions, your relationships, and your worldview. This is how your unclaimed shadow shapes your reality. Jung spoke of individuation, the process by which a person integrates their unconscious with their conscious self to become whole. But modern life makes individuation nearly impossible. When you are endlessly available to others, you become unavailable to yourself. Every yes to someone else is a no to your shadow. You stop exploring what you truly want, who you truly are, and what you truly believe. Instead, you begin to believe what others need you to believe. Here's the philosophical trap. Being perpetually available doesn't prove your worth. It quietly erases it. This is not about becoming selfish. It's about reclaiming your psychic energy, your life force. Because when you suppress your needs, you detach from your center. And when you detach from your center, you fall prey to external validation. You become dependent on others for your identity. What if your suffering isn't from being unloved, but from being unseen by yourself? Psychology today confirms many of Jung's assertions. Studies on emotional suppression show it increases sympathetic nervous system activity, the fight-or-flight response, leading to chronic stress and burnout. Dr. Daniel Wegner, a social psychologist, demonstrated in his famous White Bear study that attempting to suppress certain thoughts actually makes them more likely to surface. Applied to the shadow, this means the parts of you you refuse to confront will continue to shape your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors from the depths of your unconscious. Another study in Personality and Social Psychology Review, Gross and John, 2003, found that people who habitually suppress emotions experience less social support and more loneliness, reinforcing Jung's claim that repression leads to isolation. In other words, you can't banish your darkness without dimming your own light. So here's the final disturbing truth. The world isn't making you invisible. You are. Every time you prioritize the needs of others over your authentic self without reflection, you place another brick in the wall, separating you from your shadow. And as that wall grows, so does your discontent, your exhaustion, and your sense of being lost. Jung believed true freedom comes from integrating the shadow, acknowledging the repressed self, and reclaiming your psychic energy. But modern culture has made this the most dangerous act a person can commit, because a whole person, one who no longer seeks constant approval, is unpredictable, and unpredictable people cannot be easily controlled. What if the greatest act of rebellion is to see yourself completely? And now we arrive at the unsettling heart of it all, the point where everything you believed about love, connection, and emotional generosity must be questioned. You were told that being endlessly available makes you valuable, that by giving your time, your ear, your heart without condition, you would be cherished, that those who sacrifice the most are loved the deepest. But here lies the paradox Carl Jung so disturbingly illuminated. the more emotionally available you make yourself, the less you exist in the eyes of others, not because people are cruel, not because the world is unkind, but because you've trained them and yourself to believe that your needs are secondary, invisible, or irrelevant. You become a fixture in their lives, a background presence so reliable that it no longer commands awareness. And here's the crushing revelation. Your endless giving doesn't draw people closer. It pushes them away, not in distance, but in perception. You stop being seen as a person with depth, complexity, and boundaries. You become a function, the comforter, the supporter, the problem solver. And in this silent transaction, your identity erodes, not because others steal it, but because you willingly offer it up in the desperate hope of earning belonging. Jung called this the tragedy of the persona, where one becomes so fused with their social mask that their authentic self is lost to both themselves and the world. What if your loneliness isn't a result of being unappreciated, but of being unexpressed? The psychological and philosophical depth. Philosophically, this turning point decimates the moral narrative most societies uphold, that selflessness is the highest virtue. Jung didn't advocate for selfishness in the crude material sense, but for a psychic self-possession, a reclaiming of one's inner energy, not as an act of defiance, but of necessity. Psychologically, studies on emotional suppression, people-pleasing behaviors, and codependent dynamics confirm the damage. Chronic givers report higher rates of burnout, resentment, and emotional isolation. Their relationships, though seemingly intimate, are built on imbalance. The most disturbing realization: the system benefits from your invisibility. A society cannot easily control individuals who are self-possessed, boundary-aware, and unafraid to disappoint others. It prefers compliant personas, endlessly available, tirelessly agreeable, quietly erasing their own needs for the comfort of the collective. And here's where Jung's wisdom becomes radical. You owe the world your authenticity, not your availability. 2. Reclaim your psychic energy is not abandonment of others, but a restoration of your own humanity. It is an act of spiritual rebellion against a culture addicted to surfaces. This is the turning point. You must become less available to the world so you can become more visible to yourself. And only then, paradoxically, can you be truly seen. So now we stand at the end of this path we've walked together, through the tangled corridors of the psyche, past the hidden chambers where our unspoken selves wait, and into the bright, unsettling clarity of self-awareness. And the question that remains isn't, is this theory true? It's, what will you do with it? If you've recognized yourself in these reflections, if you've felt the weight of being too available, too giving, too invisible, understand this: your salvation doesn't lie in becoming harder or colder, but in becoming whole. Carl Jung believed individuation, the process of integrating the conscious with the unconscious, was the only path to authentic living. And a crucial part of that journey is reclaiming your psychic energy. So, how do you begin? Set boundaries. Without guilt, boundaries aren't walls. They're gates. They determine who has access to your energy and when. Practice saying no without explanation. Limit your availability, not to punish others, but to protect the sacred reservoir of your inner world. Ask yourself daily, is this nourishing me or draining me? If it's the latter, it's time to retreat, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Recognize the persona you wear. Notice the masks you unconsciously adopt: the caretaker, the advisor, the always available friend. See them for what they are: tools you learned to survive, but which now imprison you. You are not your persona. Beneath it waits the authentic self, eager to be reclaimed. Practice psychic conservation, just as you wouldn't leave your house doors open for anyone to enter. Don't allow your psychic energy to be freely consumed. Protect your attention. Limit your emotional investment in things that neither serve your growth nor align with your values. This isn't detachment, it's discernment. When you reclaim your energy, when you set boundaries and honor the silent parts of yourself, something extraordinary happens. You begin to live not as a reflection of others' needs, but as an expression of your own truth. And in that authenticity, you find a kind of quiet, indomitable power. You stop chasing love and start radiating it. You stop begging to be seen and begin seeing yourself. Jung believed that the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, holds the key to our wholeness. The anger you suppress, the needs you deny, the loneliness you refuse to name, all of it must be acknowledged. Because only by owning your hidden self can you stop being a hollow persona and become a complete sovereign individual. And isn't that what we secretly crave? To be fully, unapologetically ourselves. A parting reflection. So I ask you now, have you ever felt invisible? Not because no one was looking, but because you were too available to truly be seen. How many of your relationships are built on obligation, on unspoken agreements that you'll always be the strong one, the listener, the healer? And how would your life change if you began to reclaim even a fraction of that psychic energy you've been pouring outward? Imagine what might grow in that fertile, protected space. A new love for yourself, a clarity of purpose, a voice you forgot you had. It's not too late. Your turn. I want to hear from you. Share in the comments. Have you experienced what Jung described? Do you recognize moments where your endless giving made you unseen rather than cherished? And if you've begun the journey back to yourself, what has that been like for you? Your story might be the very thing someone else needs to hear. And if this video gave you something to think about, something that stirred you, challenged you, or comforted you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Because in a world obsessed with surfaces, we need more people willing to explore the depths. And you, my friend, just took the first step.